Hi there, it's Llarold. Today I'm going to talk about how to play Vengeance Demon Hunter in patch 10.0, the Dragonflight Pre-patch. Let me start by saying that I really liked Vengeance Demon Hunter in Dragonflight. I liked it in Shadowlands as well. It got some pretty big nerfs thrown at it after Castle Nathria when it was very overpowered, but the only real problem I had with the class from that point until now was the terrible single target damage that it dealt. It wasn't overpowered after Nathria, but it was actually still pretty tanky, and it definitely has been turned into a better version of itself in Dragonflight. Let's just start off by jumping right into the important stuff. How do you play Vengeance Demon Hunter in Dragonflight and the Dragonflight Pre-patch? Demon Hunter's a bit of a Frankenstein tank. I know Frankenstein is the name of the doctor, not the monster, but the monster is built out of parts of dead people, and that's a good metaphor for Demon Hunter tanks. They're built from the bones of the 5 other tanks. They have self-healing that scales based on damage taken, kind of like a DK. They have a limited uptime active mitigation main skill that's kind of like Warrior's Shield Block used to be, and kind of like Shield of the Righteous is for Paladin now. They have Heroic Leap like Warriors, but better. They have a diverse, weird collection of defensive cooldowns that is a bit like a mix of several other toolkits. And they have some AoE DPS and crowd control tools that are uniquely their own. This might seem like you would need to know how to play the other 5 tanks to be able to play Demon Hunter, but I think it's actually the exact opposite. I think Demon Hunter is built in a way that's really simple to pick up and play, and impactful in a moment-to-moment sense, and this makes it a really good gateway into tanking for players who don't have a lot of experience, rather than the other way around. It's a little bit of cooldown management, a little bit of active mitigation management, a little bit of resource management, and it has really good, easy-to-use AoE damage skills. It's the total package. In terms of what has changed in the Dragonflight Pre-patch and the addition of these new talent systems, Frailty is now a fully fleshed out debuff mechanic that Demon Hunters will need to spec into, and you will want to do all you can to maximize its value. Basically, it works like this. If you use Spirit Bomb, Soul Cleave, or Sigil of Flames, you debuff your targets with Frailty. Frailty makes you heal for 8% of the damage you deal to them, it reduces their damage dealt to you by 4%, and it increases your damage to them by 8%. But wait, there's more. It stacks. Each of the stacks lasts for 5 seconds, and their duration is independent of other stacks. So you can roll up to 3 stacks, and then one will fall off, and now you're at 2, and another will fall off, and you're at 1. So you can apply 2 at a time, and then those 2 will last for 5 seconds and fall off. This is a really cool design. It functions a bit like a rolling offensive and defensive layer. And that's on top of all the other skills and cooldowns you have available. And you'll want to build up several stacks of Frailty before you use your major offensive cooldowns. Again, this is pretty cool, it just layers more power into the base class. For the most part, the class plays about the same as it has, with some tweaks and a couple of new offensive cooldowns, of course. But it's mostly just stronger through passive or partially active talents, like Frailty, rather than adding tons and tons and tons of new keybinds like Brewmaster Monk. You can use Fellblade, which I like conceptually, and that will add an active skill into your rotation, but it's definitely not mandatory. I actually do think it's the worst of the 2 options in the choice node. It's just a little more fun. It basically just gives you a damage dealing charge, a gap closer that you can use as a worst case rotation filler, but it's not like great. Demon Hunter isn't carrying forward any of their great cooldown reduction tools into Dragonflight, which is one of the weirdest changes that Blizzard has made with the talent system. That was kind of their defining aspect of Shadowlands and what I thought made the class really good. They've replaced it with this cool Frailty system that I think works actually quite a bit better, but it is strange to go from being the class that has 3 different legendary builds where you can reduce the cooldown on this thing or that thing or something else to now having none. It doesn't affect the class right now during the pre-patch because those legendary powers still work as long as you're in Shadowlands, and you're gonna wear one of them and you're gonna play with that playstyle, but there it is. it's something to bear in mind during the pre-patch that will be going away in Dragonflight. In terms of how strong the class is right now and in the next expansion, it's looking pretty strong. It seems like they're going to be in a really good place in both Raid and Mythic Plus and Dragonflight, I feel. The biggest issues that Demon Hunters had during Shadowlands were horrible single target damage, which definitely hurt them in Raid a little bit, and inconsistent defensive layers, which was a real problem in Mythic Plus. Both of these have been buffed pretty tremendously. Demon Hunter already had a lot of defensive layers, and when it has several active at the same time, it's very hard to die while playing a Demon Hunter. But anytime you have gaps in your defensive layers, which are like Demon Spikes, Metamorphosis, Fiery Brand, Trinkets, your 20% versatility buff from being Carrion with the Covenant Legendary. Those are all like nice defensive layers that you can layer on top of each other. Without them, you are pretty vulnerable. The Vengeance Mastery has been changed to increase your armor all the time now, instead of only while Demon Spikes is up. This isn't a gigantic buff. It works at 50% while Demon Spikes isn't up instead of doing literally nothing. I don't think it actually makes Mastery like a good stat or anything, but it moves the floor on your tankiness up quite a bit, and in conjunction with other defensive layers that you will be rolling, like Frailty, I think it actually makes the class on an average state quite a bit more defensively reliable, which is good. That really fixes the problem the class had. Also, they gave it 2 more offensive cooldowns, so you just do a boatload more damage in single target. And with that, I'm going to dive in game, look at the talent tree there, go through some of the key talents and the 3 talent builds that I've put together, and just point out the stuff that I think is important and, some of the stuff that I think you can change around based on personal preference. Alright, so I have 3 talent builds that I want to show off here. The Mythic Plus build, a Fiery Soul build, and a Collective Anguish build. Now, I think that the Fiery Soul build and the Collective Anguish build, those are sort of quote-unquote raid builds, but I think both of those can be used in Mythic Plus. Any build can be used anywhere. I don't really think that there's that designated of Mythic Plus versus raid builds, but in Mythic Plus you will want to pick up some more crowd control and group utility oriented talents like some of these right here. Chaos Nova, AoE stun, good for the group. Consume magic, just a direct offensive magic dispel, good for a party where maybe you're not going to have somebody who's able to reliably dispel for you, but in raid, of course, you're going to be able to, and the demand for dispels is not going to be that valuable or that high. So I'll just kind of go over the talents that I'm taking. I like Vengeful Retreat in every talent build. I just think it's nice, it's definitely not essential. Vengeance Demon Hunter has enough mobility already, but it is nice to be able to have even more, and it's a very cheap point. Blazing Path gives you another charge on Infernal Strike. I do feel like that's pretty non-negotiable and really no reason to skip it anyway. Sigil of Flame you get for free, and that gives you 30 Fury when you use it now. So I'll just tap it. See? Boom. Immediately 30 Fury. Pretty nice. Imprison is a talent that is definitely optional. I wouldn't take it in a lot of raid builds. I think it is worth skipping, but for Mythic Plus, just being able to use that Imprison as like an impromptu crowd control, interrupt, whatever, is pretty good. Shattered Restoration is obviously a mandatory talent. 10% more healing from your main source of self-healing. You gotta have that. Improved Disrupt, Consume Magic, Bouncing Glaives. None of these are really that essential. They're just useful for getting further down the tree. Flames of Fury over here, by the way, as you can see, to double your Fury from this Sigil of Flames, you would have to hit 15 targets, which is crazy. This is quite a bad talent, and it doesn't help with pathing at all. Pretty bad. Same with Vengeful Bonds over here. Pretty bad. I don't really have any idea what that's useful for. This I can see for PvP. This I can't see use ever. Pursuit, Mastery giving you move speed. It's not really a lot. As you can see, this is my move speed. With Mastery, it doesn't feel significantly faster. than just 100% regular move speed. Here we have our first choice node right in the sort of the middle of the tree, and there's not a connecting line here. This is just sort of like a pathing restart. You just get this point for free. You don't have to connect anything to it. Kind of nice. But here you have the choice of very boring basic 6% crit chance with Immolation Aura, which synergizes with one talent on the other side of the tree. Not really that big of a deal. Or Fellblade, which is like a nice little gap closer, but it doesn't actually do much damage, and it adds a little bit of like more keybind complexity as opposed to just sort of free damage. I like Fellblade conceptually. It's only 15 yards. It's really just like, here's 40 Fury when you have absolutely nothing else to cast. Instead of casting like Throw Glaive, where you're going to do 650 damage, you could do Fellblade and get 40 Fury, and isn't that nice? It's okay. I think either of these can be fine. I feel pretty confident that Fellblade is worse overall, but more complicated to use. That's not a good combo. Charred Warblades is, 5% of all fire damage you deal heals you. That's pretty good sounding. You don't actually do quite as much fire damage as you might think. Like, a lot of your damage, Fracture is physical, Elysian Decree is arcane, the Hunt is nature damage. But then a lot of stuff, Fell Devastation, Soul Carver, Spirit Bomb, those are all fire damage. Immolation Aura is obviously fire damage. It's going to shock you to find out that Sigil of Flames is fire damage. So it's maybe like I think actually more like a 40-60 split, about 40% fire damage, which is okay. Not really that much leech, to be honest. In either case, if you want to, you can take Chaos Nova or Sigil of Misery for Mythic Plus. I wouldn't really feel like either of these talents is necessary for Raid, but they're nice to have. There is also this little choice node here, Concentrated Sigils versus Precise Sigils. These can actually be workarounded a bit. I'm going to pull up a macro here. Here is my @player Sigil of Flame macro. So when I hit this, it casts Sigil of Flame at my location. If I'm spec'd into either of these, cast at your target's location or at your location, they should just work where they automatically cast at your location, if you're taking Concentrated, or at your target's location if you're using Precise Sigils. However, if you have these macro conditionals, which are at cursor, which will cast it, wherever your cursor is, or at player, which will cast at where you're standing, that will override these talents. You can have Precise Sigils and then cast at yourself with a macro, and it will cast at yourself. Kind of a whoopsie on Blizzard's part. The 2 extra seconds of uptime on Sigils mostly applies to Sigil of Silence, which is actually not bad, and Sigil of Flames, which is not like really worth all that much. Rush of Chaos is pretty mandatory. It's really good for pathing anyway, considering it's just sort of a free point randomly thrown in there. But also, a minute off of your main defensive cooldown is good. Soul Rending, 10% leech, and then another 10% when you have meta up. And you have meta up fairly often, so that's good. Immolation Aura giving you 20% armor out of Infernal Armor. That's really good too, and again, useful for pathing to get over to here. Demonic is probably the mandatory point in the entire left tree. Just about as mandatory as anything that is over here. It's really good for pathing toward the bottom, where you want to come down here and get the Hunt. And you can go either way. You can go through Soul Sigils, which makes it so that all of your sigils generate a soul fragment. That's useful. It's good resource generation, generally the better option. You could go left through Darkness, which gives you sort of a pretty long cooldown, but a useful raid defensive cooldown, so that's an option. I think you're going to wind up taking both of these in Dragonflight, but for right now, Darkness is a little questionable. And finally, this little line of talents right here is very mandatory. 6% health for 2 points isn't great, but it's fine. 3% parry is fine. 2 seconds on the duration of sigil effects is okay. But 20% off the cooldown of your sigils is great. It interacts with Elysian Decree, taking it from a 60-second cooldown to 48, which then stacks with your Mechanicos Soulbind down here, Effusive Anima Accelerator, so you can get that down from 48 all the way down to 28 if you're using it in AoE. Pretty nice. And yeah, that's about all there is to it. Most of these other talents are not very good. The ones underneath the Hunt, not very good. 8% magic damage reduction after you sigil an enemy, not great. These ones that affect darkness, pretty low value on the return. And then this one down here, Collective Anguish, fantastic, but it's also a Shadowlands legendary, and I think you're better off just wearing the legendary. Now we'll come over here and take a look at the right tree. Pretty much every spec in the game kind of has it oriented in some way where you have a bunch of mandatory traits that you have to take at the top. And in this case, they're all really good anyway. Like, you wouldn't want to play Vengeance Demon Hunter without Fell Devastation, or Frailty, or Fiery Brand, or Parry Chance on your Demon Spikes. You can get away without running Infernal Strike. Meteoric Strikes, 8 seconds off of the cooldown of Infernal Strike is nice. It takes it down to 12 base. And eventually, if you are talented into Erratic Fellheart over here, that knocks another 20% off for 2 points, which is pretty expensive, but you know, it knocks another second or two off the cooldown, which, a 10-second, 30-yard leap is pretty incredible. No class in the game has mobility like that, not even Monk. It's crazy. You don't really hit any sort of choice nodes until like right here. Roaring Fire is just sort of a generic healing intake increase from your Fell Devastation. I really think this talent is quite bad. But if the option is Sigil of Silence and you don't need to silence anything, kind of bad is better than literally worthless by a lot. By 100%. That being said, in Mythic Plus, I think Sigil of Silence is really nice to have. For the most part, this right side of the tree doesn't really work very well. You have talents like 10% reduced magic damage taken while Immolation Aura is active. Well, just to show, like, Immolation Aura is up about 75% of the time, so that's okay, that's not bad. But then you have options like Bulk Extraction and Soul Barrier, both of which aren't very appealing. You have Chains of Anger, wow, 2-yard radius on sigils. Cycle of Binding, hitting an enemy with a sigil reduces the cooldown of sigils by 3 whole seconds, but all of your sigil cooldowns are in the 30-second or minute plus range, so that's not really that great. Just a lot of somewhat undertuned stuff over on this side. Worth playing around with just to kind of see how it feels, but it doesn't feel great. Over here on the left, we have an absolute non-choice node of Sheer Fury, which is bad, and Fracture, which is incredible. Calcified Spikes is a really nice talent, 10% damage reduction when your Demon Spikes falls off, like just to show that off here. We're just going to sit here, 3, 2, 1, 0, boom, 10% damage reduction, 9, 8, 10% damage reduction isn't quite a defensive cooldown, but it is a pretty incredible defensive layer to get for the cost of 1 talent point high in the tree. My only real issue with it, and the only reason I would ever drop it from any talent build, is it's useless for pathing. You have to come get Fractured. This is essential to the way that the rotation functions. This isn't adding anything, it just helps you path to a node you've already unlocked. I still would never drop Calcified Spikes for anything less than, like, super easy, leveling content or whatever. Agonizing Flames is really nice, big damage and mobility increase. Good defensive increase too, given that you have Infernal Armor and some other value out of Immolation Aura. Burning Blood I kind of already touched on. There's not quite as much fire damage in the tree as you might think. This isn't a 10% damage increase, this is like a 4% damage increase or whatever, but still not bad. Spirit Bomb is the really big thing that ties the whole spec together and the whole playstyle together. In Mythic Plus, it is a very different playstyle from Soul Cleave, where with Soul Cleave you generate Fury, you spend Fury, you use your cooldowns, that's it. With Spirit Bomb, you change from worrying so much about Fury to worrying about souls. You want to generate 5 souls, 4 to 5 souls, consume them all with a single Spirit Bomb, and then blast away all of your remaining Fury with Soul Cleave, and then regenerate those souls. Generating and consuming the souls is more important than managing the Fury or managing the Soul Cleave, but it is important to try to do both. Because, as you can see, 40 Fury now for Spirit Bomb instead of the 30 that it was during Shadowlands, the playstyle is quite a bit different. Void Reaver is the one that gives you 4% damage reduction from Frailty. Again, just more Frailty stuff. And here we have Fallout. This is really nice in AoE. It gives you a pretty big burst of Lesser Soul Fragments, so you can kind of, I'll even go demonstrate actually. See if I can just ride up here to the punching bags. All right, no souls up, hit Immolation Aura, and 3 souls. Of course, right now I don't have enough Fury to be able to Spirit Bomb because that's not really how you do the opener now. So my opener would not look exactly like this, but it would look something along these lines. Hey, there it is. All right, so you know. There you go. Making use of Sigil of Flame, making use of the fact that it generates soul fragments, making use of the fact that hitting Immolation Aura inside of a pack of mobs is going to generate a bunch of soul fragments as well, trying to Spirit Bomb all those soul fragments that I can to get a great big burst of AoE damage on the start of a pull. And yeah, I think that was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 GCDs or something. I did like 35,000, 350,000 damage out of, I don't know how long that pull was. It doesn't really matter. Now I need to know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 total casts, 350,000 damage and a little 5 or 6 mob pull. Not bad. Volatile Flame Blood is pretty simple. It just gives you more Fury for critting with MO Aura. Not bad. It helps you with resource costs. And Dark Glare Boon, which is really, really nice to have. As you can see here, just gave back a bunch of Fury, cut the cooldown as soon as the spell finished casting. Focus Cleave is okay. It definitely boosts the value of Soul Cleave as a single target damage dealing talent. I like Painbringer conceptually, but the fact that it costs 2 points to get through makes it a little questionable for me. The damage value isn't quite good enough for the high cost. Defensive value, I mean. And finally, down here at the bottom, we have what I consider the locked-in talents. Vulnerability, essential to get to these 2 incredible bonuses down here. Soul Crush, which makes it so that Soul Cleave double stacks Frailty on your primary target, and so that you're able to roll Frailty. Like, without this, the whole Frailty model doesn't work at all. You're just refreshing a 4% damage reduction debuff on an enemy. Like, it's not really that valuable, but being able to stack it up 3 or 4 times, and now it's not a 4% damage reduction debuff, it's a 16% damage reduction debuff. Insane. And then Soul Carver is just a pretty nice single target damage cooldown. You know, you use this and it does like 15,000 damage or 14,000 damage for a single global. It also shatters a bunch of soul fragments out. So if you're playing Spirit Bomb, it's nice for setting up another Spirit Bomb really quickly. You know, even if you're not playing Spirit Bombs, soul fragments are still good for being alive. Okay, now let's take a look at the Fiery Soul build here. There are a handful of changes. Honestly, they're not that big. I do sort of intend this to be more of a raid build. You can see I've taken Unrestrained Fury, I've dropped Consume Magic. Technically, you could drop Imprison for raid builds. It's not essential. There's not really a lot of other great talents to take in its place, though, up high where you still need points so that you can path deep down here. There's some nice talents down here, but you can't afford them all. Over on the right side here, one of the main things that you're dropping is Spirit Bomb, and that's because you're running Fiery Soul, which is this legendary right here. Here. Each soul fragment consumed by Soul Cleave reduces the cooldown of Fiery Brand by 2 seconds. You'll want to consume all of your soul fragments with soul cleave if you're running that setup, so Spirit Bomb is going to be totally worthless to you. You're also going to want to do basically everything you can to juice the value of Fiery Brand in this setup. It was considered the supreme defensive setup for a long time for Vengeance Demon Hunter until tier sets came along, basically. And it was really good in Shadowlands for staying alive on a single target. The problem I have with it is that it doesn't really work that well in AoE. There's this talent here, Burning Alive, which works okay. It spreads kind of slowly in AoE, and it won't spread back to a target that it's already been on. And it doesn't interact like nicely with Revel in Pain. As you can see here, when Fiery Brand expires on your primary target, you gain a shield that's worth blah, 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 blah. So you're not going to be getting a shield, you know, the Fiery Brands jumped around to 5 targets and then, oh, great, I'm going to get a shield from each of those guys. You're just getting the 1. You can drop Revel in Pain. Very annoying. You can drop Revel in Pain, I guess, and pick up Meteoric Strikes. I think that's fine. You obviously can drop Burning Alive if it's pure single target. It's literally worthless. And even if it's like 2 targets, if one of them's not really that dangerous, you could drop it and pick up Soul Carver. And that'll give you some more fire damage that you can then flex with this Fiery Brand. Also increases fire damage you deal to the target. Blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, this talent setup is all still pretty similar. Now let's take a look at the Collective Anguish build, and this is kind of my go-to build for raiding, for any raiding I'm going to do on the Demon Hunter for the rest of the expansion, rest of the patch anyway. Again, the left tree is very similar. There's not a lot of stuff being changed. I like precise sigils as a concept, being able to drop sigils, you know, where the target is. That's pretty cool. And then 2 extra seconds on the duration isn't like a huge deal, but it does add 1 extra tick of Sigil of Flame, so that's a little bit of damage, you know, it's more than 0. That's nice. Again, I think that you can drop Spirit Bomb. Spirit Bomb's good for your AoE DPS, but I think for anything that's more single target-ish, which is kind of how I think of raid builds, Spirit Bomb's not really that great. It definitely doesn't feel as good for trying to keep stacks of Frailty rolling. Again, you get 2 stacks of Frailty out of a Soul Cleave on the primary target, whereas you only get the 1 out of Spirit Bomb. It also costs 40 Fury instead of 30, and, you know, you're kind of trying to hold Spirit Bomb until you've generated 4 or 5 souls, which takes quite a bit longer than generating 30 or 40 Fury. So you're just getting way fewer stacks of Frailty if you're playing Spirit Bomb. Kind of a less safe playstyle. Great in AoE, makes up for its shortcomings in AoE, but in smaller packs it really doesn't. As you can see, you've got Dark Glare Boon here. You know, again, really, really nice synergies, just kind of all layering on top of Fell Devastation in a way that works really well with the Collective Anguish legendary, which is, equipped. This one. Yeah, it makes it so that when you Fell Dev, you also I-beam. That's it. It sort of looks like it's casting to your side, but it doesn't actually function that way, and I'll even show it off here. It literally just adds I-beam damage onto your Fell Devastations. Can see here your Fell Devastation, Fell Devastation, scroll up about 1,000,000 miles. There we go. Your I-beam hit, did some damage. Pretty basic, but it does do a really big burst of AoE damage. Like, let's just go ahead and generate some. Okay, we have enough Fury. I'm just gonna walk in and just Fell Dev this pack of 5 mobs. Wait, yep, 5 mobs. Not bad. You know, 88,000 damage for a single global in 5 target AoE. Not too bad. Alrighty, my last little thoughts here are just simply to say that I think Extended Spikes is not that great. Ruinous Bulwark is one of my least favorite talents in the whole tree, along with Soulmonger. I think anything that says, oh, instead of overhealing, you get like a tiny bit of shielding or whatever, I'm never going to like that style of talent. And then coming down here and getting Last Resort is just crazy expensive, and anything that would cost you to give up Frailty is insane. It's so good, it's so much better than like a cheat death to be able to have this stacking, rolling, massive damage reduction and damage increase debuff available to you. So yeah, there it is. I feel like the talent tree is kind of locked in place down near the bottom, which dictates the way that you get there somewhat, but there's actually quite a bit of fluidity up near the top in both of the trees. A lot of optional stuff up in here, consume magic, swallowed anger, disrupting fury, whatever. These are all interesting options. You can take a lot of these things. I mean, like Feast of Souls is not very good, but you could take Fell Flame Fortification to get down to Burning Blood. You don't have to take Roaring Fire. You could do something like this. All right, well, that's it. Let's move on to whatever's next. The rotation for Vengeance is pretty forgiving, and I think my favorite aspect of it is that it's really good at generating AoE threat. I find myself picking up Threat and Mythic Plus from pull to pull on a Demon Hunter, just having a much easier time than I do on any other tank. Like, sure, Bear Druid can thrash spam their way to holding threat over anything in AoE every 3 minutes, but Demon Hunter always has enough AoE damage to hold packs every time on the pull, and that's really great. And it's really quite beginner friendly too. You basically can just, if you really want to be overcompensating, you can throw down a Sigil of Flames before you leap in, but then leap in and hit Immolation Aura, and you're pretty much good to go. You could throw down a Kyrian Sigil and a Spirit Bomb if you really want to seal the deal. In terms of maximizing your damage, you have a lot of offensive cooldowns now, which is a great change. It's a pretty big one. And you want to maximize their value by waiting until you have at least 2 to 3 stacks of Frailty on the target to get as much damage out of them as you can. In pure single target, you're basically going to jump in, hit them with Soul Cleave a couple of times. That'll get you to 4 stacks of Frailty very quickly. Then you slap them with whatever offensive cooldowns you have available, and they're doing 32% extra damage. Pretty nice. In terms of defensive cooldowns, you want to try to roll appropriate defensive cooldowns anytime that your demon spikes aren't up. Metamorphosis is a really strong mitigation tool, and you can get it directly or from casting Fell Devastation, and you want to layer out those defensives bit by bit while you're tanking, so that your health pool remains fairly steady and you can heal back your damage intake with Spirit Bomb or Soul Cleave. There are 2 basic rotations. One thing that has changed a little bit in the pre-patch is that the Spirit Bomb build, which, prioritized building souls and then consuming them with Spirit Bomb in the past, it still functions like that, but you do want to dump your Fury or Rage or whatever it's called in between your Spirit Bombs by using Soul Cleave now. That is actually a priority so that you can maintain those Frailty stacks. It's pretty valuable to do so, when in the past it was very low value to waste time casting Soul Cleave. Now let's talk about stats. Item level is king. Agility mostly scales with your item level, and whenever in doubt, you just want to go for higher item level. When you're comparing pieces that are around the same item level, haste is the best secondary stat, versatility is a close second, and mastery and crit are kinda tied for last place. Because you're getting Dark Glare Boon from the talent tree and it doesn't stack with the Dark Glare Boon legendary, your value in legendaries is pretty different from what it was in Shadowlands. Razalik's Defilement was a Soul Cleave oriented legendary that was pretty popular for maximizing your DPS and raids, specifically in like single target situations, and that seems like it is pretty much on the outs with the community. I played around with it a little bit. It seems like it's fine, but Collective Anguish is definitely very good in AoE, and I always kind of liked the way it handled more anyways, so I'm happy to see that now that Dark Glare Boon is sort of baked into the talent tree, of course you want to have Collective Anguish. They synchronize nicely with each other. You could run Fiery Soul for a more defensive playstyle. I already talked about that a little bit in the talent section. I don't really think it's all that great, But if you do go with that, you definitely don't want to run Spirit Bomb. You need to be consuming all your soul fragments with Soul Cleave in that setup. The best Covenant in the Dragonflight pre-patch is still Kyrian. Elysian Decree is really, really strong, and you will be picking it up as a talent in Dragonflight, so being able to play with it and get comfortable using it in conjunction with your other cooldowns right now is really good. Well, I think that about covers it. Vengeance Demon Hunter is looking pretty nice right now. It's really fun to play. There's a good bit of diversity in your options in the talent tree, although there are some hard locked in spots as well. I really like the way that it's handling. It's definitely one of the most fun tanks to play, and pretty strong. Well, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions. Take care, like and subscribe, and all that stuff. Bye.